I have said to us recently that in speaking on the issue of reparations over the last 3 decades or so, this was never really a current affairs issue. Reparations for African people in compensation for the worst crimes against humanity ever committed is a normal requirement of justice for any civilized people. And even though now that the conversation is becoming a lot broader, you're getting a lot of attempts desperately at counter-arguments, but the African Holocaust, or enslavement suffered by black people, is the worst crime against humanity and the worst Holocaust ever for 4 main reasons. One, the amount of lives lost. And in comparison to the Jewish Holocaust, which a lot of people refrain from even speaking about the Jewish Holocaust unless it is something complementary to the community of the victims, but at the same time they try to denigrate the victims of the African Holocaust. Point number one, the number of victims of the African Holocaust exceeded 100 million. The Jewish Holocaust was approximately 6 million. Point number two, the duration of time of the African Holocaust was well over 300 years, while the Jewish Holocaust lasted for 6 years from 1939 to 1945. Fourth, the sociological damage that was done to the African family as a result of those crimes against humanity with the destruction of the black family. The man was used as a stud horse, the women were repeatedly raped to create human farms. After the abolition of the slave trade, while slavery itself was still legal, they created industries of reproduction through rape of African people, which had long-lasting damage on the stability of the black family. And four, the psychological damage that was done to a people who had self-hatred induced within them through a religious, cultural, and educational system and curriculum that taught black inferiority and white supremacy, so much so to the point that up to this day, people of African descent in the Western Hemisphere in particular are still suffering the after effects of that self-hatred. And there are no other people at any time in all the annals of history during any era that have suffered even a fraction of what African people have suffered. And now, more than ever, European nations and interest groups are coming to the realization that some kind of compensation is due for this. Now, the point I've been making recently is that for all the last 3 decades when we've been dealing with this topic, it was never a current affairs issue. But now, in 2023, moving up to the halfway mark of the year, there is almost a new news item on the issue of reparations almost every 2 weeks or so. Now, I'm going to give you some of this history really quickly, and then we're going to come up to the newest development. First of all, the University of Glasgow in Scotland, after doing their research, came to the conclusion that they became a multi-million-dollar educational institution with all of its successes because they benefited from profits made from the slave trade with their early owners and investors. So the University of Glasgow in Scotland has made a decision to pay 200 million British pounds, which is close to 2 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars, in compensation or reparations for the crimes against humanity that their founding fathers participated in. This would be through programs filtered through the University of the West Indies. We've spoken about Digicel, the cell phone company, who announced through their CEO, Dennis O'Brien, in July 2022, that they are going to launch what they describe as the repair campaign. So Digicel has announced that they're going to launch a fund for reparations for the descendant of enslaved Africans who have suffered these crimes against humanity. Then we went to the Member of Parliament from the United Kingdom, Richard Drax, who's the MP for South Dorset. He was invited over to Barbados by Prime Minister Mia Mottley, Member of Parliament Trevor Prescott, and our brother CARICOM ambassador David Commission to discuss his family paying reparations to Barbados because they had several slave plantations and estates, and they purchased numerous enslaved Africans and committed these atrocities against them. And so he actually went over to Barbados to engage in these talks with the government of Barbados to pay reparations to the people of Barbados through various programs and schemes. Then we saw towards the end of 2022, the Prime Minister of Holland, Mark Rutte, on December the 19th, 2022, formally apologized for slavery. Now, that might not sound like such an enormous step, but remember, in the 10-point plan of action for reparations drafted by Professor Sir Hilary Beckles of the University of the West Indies in Barbados, the 10 points included the first point being a full formal apology. Second, you had repatriation. Third was Indigenous Peoples Program. Fourth was establishment of cultural institutions. Fifth was dealing with the public health crisis. 6, 7, and 8 was an African knowledge program, psychological rehabilitation, and illiteracy eradication. Then 9 and 10 were debt cancellation and the transfer of modern technology. But it starts with point number 1, a proper full formal apology, because the members of the royal family and King Charles and Prince William and all of the representatives of British interests, including their past prime ministers, have issued statements of regret and statements of sorrow and condemnation, but to this day, the British Empire has not officially said, we are sorry for what we did to you, which is step number 1 in the CARICOM reparations plan. But Prime Minister of Holland came out and made that bold step in December 2022. Then going early into January 2023, we saw the Anglican Church coming forward, accepting that they had a major role in the slave trade. And the leader of the Anglican Church, the Archbishop of Canterbury, on January 11th, 2023, announced that they intend to open a fund for reparations for slavery. He said, I'm deeply sorry. Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, he said, the time has come to take action in response to this shameful past. And then right after this, we saw another major step where on February 27th, 2023, there was an official reparations handing over ceremony in Grenada, where this family, the Trevelyan family, also in doing their research, finding the facts, getting the information, also uncovered the truth that their multi-million-dollar wealth came from the involvement in the slave trade. So they got an official position paper, a policy document that was signed by 42 living members of their family that they will pay from their own personal wealth a symbolic reparations payment to the people of Grenada from England. And then we saw, again in 2023, Lloyds Bank of England, and putting on their website that their deep regret in the fact that they themselves were involved in the slave trade and participated in almost the trafficking of 3.2 million enslaved Africans. Now, all of this was known, but it was still yet to be admitted to. So Lloyds of London, on their website, again in 2023, have put forth their confession and their intention to pay reparations. And of course, all of those cases set a precedent for the British royal family, who have extracted billions upon billions of dollars in wealth stolen from Africa, as well as benefiting from the enslavement of African people itself. through the funding of slavery voyages, of which they got maximum profits and returns from, establishing the Commonwealth, where the wealth of black nations became the property of white nations. And the Queen of England still is the head of state in many Commonwealth countries, and the property, lands, and goods, and the idea of the grand imperial family, where in South Africa, she, in 1948, 4 years before she actually became the Queen of England, referred to the white apartheid racist South African regime as all being one grand imperial family with the white royal family of the United Kingdom. And this is why so many protest movements were sparked off in their recent visit and tour of members of the royal family into the Caribbean. Because people are getting conscious now that this message of truth started so long ago. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, in point number 4 of What the Muslims Want, spoke about separate land and territory and compensation to the descendants of enslaved Africans. It was the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan in 2004 who hosted the largest known reparations conference to date on February 29th in that year, which was following after a series of workshops and seminars and lecture presentations on reparations. This consciousness has spread far and wide for the last few decades on the evil that these men have done. And now, in 2021, 2022, 2023, and then we're about to step into 2024, which will be the final year in the United Nations Decade for People of African Descent. Some in political power have not even acknowledged it as yet. But this image here of these atrocities, these cruelties, this brutality, this persistent genocide, this mass murder, and torture and rape and dehumanization of several tens of millions of African people must be compensated for. And so we must pass on this knowledge to the next generation. But all that I just mentioned is still in motion, because we haven't even come up to the most recent cases, such as just a few weeks ago in late March, the state of California passed a bill for reparations for African families, the descendants of enslaved Africans. Coming back over across the pond, as they say, British Member of Parliament Clive Lewis, right after the Grenada handing over ceremony of reparations by the Trevelyan family, brought it up in the British Parliament as a major matter to be considered. This was reported in the UK Guardian, March 8, 2023, where Member of Parliament Clive Lewis called for the United Kingdom to negotiate Caribbean slavery reparations. And he says that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak should talk to the region's leaders after the Trevelyan family's announcement of paying reparations to Grenada. This is in the British Parliament itself, in the House of Commons, where the parliamentarians engaged in debate over reparations for slavery to Caribbean nations. And Member of Parliament Nadia Witome also supported the measure, as so many others did. And the major premise for this was the Slave Compensation Act of 1837, where the whites were paid reparations for the loss of their property, while the victims received nothing. And the compensation or reparations that the whites received was for the loss of their property. In this instance, their property was us. And do you know when these payments were completed? In the year 2015. There were tax exemption arrangements from 1837 that were finally paid off in 2015. All this time, people rallying for justice, they're still paying reparations. This means that hard-working taxpayers of African descent who live in the United Kingdom, who were born in the United Kingdom, either of African parentage from the continent or Caribbean parentage, be it from Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, Guyana, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, Antigua, Dominica, or Grenada. Black people who are now British citizens, who work and pay taxes, would have indirectly paid reparations themselves to the white slave masters for them losing their property, who were our great, 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 great grandmothers and great, 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 great grandfathers. So now we come up to April 2023, and an article appeared in the UK Guardian newspaper, which is probably the top newspaper in all of the United Kingdom, probably in all of Europe, the most prestigious newspaper. And in this newspaper, the owner of the newspaper hired historians and researchers to come up with the truth of the information, just like with the other institutions. And the UK Guardian newspaper have now also confessed that they too have benefited from slavery, and they're prepared now to engage in discussions on how they can pay compensation or reparations for the crimes against humanity that they would have participated in. Now, I want to show you this article in a bit more detail, but to set the tone, I'm going to run for you a short video